Which rule changes should you be making in your Dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So just visit FanDuel.com to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today is Matt Williamson, filling in for Kate Madjuk. You can follow Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. You can also check out his new YouTube channel as well. And today, Matt, we're talking about some rule changes that you should be implementing in your Dynasty leagues. And let's start with some easy ones to keep people engaged during the season, because I think the easiest thing to happen, especially, you can use these for redrafts as well, but if you get off to a slow start, let's say you're 2-5, but you feel like your team's really good, sometimes it's easy to get discouraged or check out. I want your thoughts on this idea that we've put into our Dynasty leagues. 12-team league, 4 teams make the playoffs. The top 3 are based on record. The 4th spot goes to the team that scores the most points during the regular season that isn't one of those top 3 teams. What do you think?
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. One of my least favorite things about fantasy as a whole is win-loss record and Super Bowl champs matter more than they should, in my opinion. So my home redraft league that I've been in, honestly, now for like 30 years with guys I graduated high school with. I mean, I'm the only one that's, quote, a professional in there. There's lawyers and, contractors and et cetera in those leagues. We're all in those leagues. Mm-hmm. I love how we disperse the pot in that league. And here's how we do it is whoever comes in first with points gets 50% of the pot. Okay. Whoever wins the Super Bowl gets 35% of the pot. And whoever comes second in points gets 15% of the pot. Now, it's not uncommon to win the Super Bowl and also be a leader either first or second in points. But to me, that's the best way of determining who had the best season, And so if we can reflect that into Dynasty, and like you mentioned, reward a playoff team, reward someone by putting them in the playoffs who was the best point scorer rather than happened to be 12-2 or whatever, but really is not a good team. I think that's a better, proper way to do it. I like that a lot.
There's just a lot of luck that goes into these leagues.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I've seen it. I've seen a team be the highest scoring team throughout the course of the season and be like 3 or 4 games below 500, just because every week they're playing somebody who's scoring a couple more points than they are, right? Like 200 to 197 point games. I think Dynasty should try to be fun. All right. You should try to make these leagues fun and competitive at the same time. So I'm all about trying to reward players or managers for doing cool things. So, for example, in one of our leagues, we have, and it's not a ton. It could be, $40 or $50.
Doesn't matter. It could be 400,
whatever.
Right? Yeah.
$50 to whoever had the single player that had the highest scoring game. Right. Throughout the course. Now they have, that player has to be in their starting lineup. It can't be somebody on your bench, and then we give something, maybe $100 to the team that had the highest amount of points scored in 1 week. All of these prizes, not like door prizes, but like just consolation prizes. Even if you don't have a team that's going to end up winning the championship, I think these are all good ideas to help people stay engaged and involved in your leagues.
Along those lines, I was just thinking about this too, as you were saying that. The same league I'm talking about, it's my old school high school redraft league. Every week, whatever team had the most points gets $25. Whatever team had the least points pays $25. If your team 2 through 6, you get $10. If you're 7 through 11, you pay $10. So you got to stay engaged or it costs you week after week. Obviously Dynasty, there's a prize at the end of the road that you maybe get an early pick out of it by being bad. But in redraft, it should cost you if you stink or if you're not paying attention or,
Yes.
And frankly, how often does the best team truly win the Super Bowl in any fantasy league we're in? Not all that often. You know what I mean? So I think there should be a prize for being the best team, and not just having a bad defensive coordinator. You know what I mean?
I agree. You said something else about engage. Now, I think most managers that play dynasty football do a good job of staying up with their team. However, I think you and I have both been part of leagues where a manager will draft, they'll do the rookie draft, and then after week 3 or 4, they'll check out, right? For whatever reason. Maybe they don't like their team or life got busy or whatever reason. I want your thoughts on this one. I play in a league where you must execute 2 trades over the course of a calendar year, or you don't get invited back to the following year. Now, it could be, hey, I'm giving you my 5th round rookie pick. You give me back your 4th and your next year 4th, right? It has to be something of consequence. And again, it doesn't have to be like I'm trading you Garrett Wilson for Puka Nacua, but a somewhat of a trade that has some kind of stakes, right? And that way you are at least actively involved in trade discussions all year. And what we've seen is we've never had to deal with somebody losing their spot, and it actually encourages people to trade more. So I want to know, what do you think?
I don't love it, but I love the spirit of it. You know, I mean, anything that initiates activity, I am very, very fond of. And 2 of my dynasty leagues are run by one of the best commissioners I've ever seen. And he very, very much stays on top of things. And along those lines, he will threaten to kick you out of the league and has kicked people out of the league and everyone's done it here and there by accident, playing someone on a bye or
But it
not
probably has to
submitting
be
your
like
lineup.
repeated offenders of this. Correct?
Exactly. One mistake, okay. You know, like I always tell the story that the Saints were playing in London or whatever Sunday morning. I slept in, I put it on my DVR, went down there, and Alvin Kamara was inactive out of no one had any suspect. I'm like, oh, I started, I get a 0. But the other thing that he does too is he monitors if you don't respond to a trade. You know, like if I send you the worst trade offer ever, at least you can do is reject it. You know, go to the site and reject it. If you don't respond at all, that's another strike against you. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I just think if you can get a good commissioner that can encourage activity in your league, whether it's trading, responding to trades, making sure that you're making waiver wire movements. I mean, that's the other thing is I was in a dynasty league where somebody had $200 in fab. They didn't spend it all year. I mean, and I understand wanting to save your money, but if you go all year and you're not spending your fab money, it's a little suspicious, right? I mean, you want the members in your dynasty league to be active. So I think these are all at least things to keep an eye on or remember when you're creating your dynasty leagues to help create some more competition. All right, Matt, let's get to some more rule changes, including should you be able to pick your opponent if you are the number 1 seed? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing more than I love than after a long day sitting on my couch and watching a couple of different games. I actually have 3 TVs in my living room, so that way I can keep up on all the games, whether it's basketball, baseball. Obviously, we've got the Olympics coming up, but with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch. And the sports aren't sporting the way that I'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Matt, one of the problems that I've had my dynasty leagues is that we've struggled to figure out what the number 1 seed should get for being the number one seed? Should it be a
Mhm.
first round bye? Should it be an additional home field advantage of like 10 extra points that week in round one? One of the solutions that we've come up with is allowing the first place team to pick their opponent, because there are some times where the number one seed will play a really hot 4 seed or 6 seed or whatever the final seed is, and it's almost a disadvantage because that final team just snuck into the playoffs because they got super hot over the final 5 weeks of the season. What are your thoughts on how do we reward the top seeded regular season team?
This is kind of new to me in terms of choosing your opponent. There's a lot of leagues, obviously, like where 6 teams get in, the first 2 get a bye, and that's great. I don't dislike picking your opponent, though. I mean, obviously, we've all been there, even if we're the 1 seed, where we squeak in and a lot of our guys are hurt, or a 6 seed, a 4 seed, or whatever, as you mentioned, picked up the right players or had some right injuries where their backups are now on fire and they're the best team entering the playoffs. Part of me thinks that definitely one of the things I like best about Dynasty is it's closer to the NFL than really any other form.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So part of me just thinks tough noogies. You know, the Bills are a wild card team. They're on fire. You don't want them coming to your hometown. So be it. That's just the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
Oh, well. And we'll make up for it, back to our conversation 10 minutes ago of, well, if you're the highest scoring team, you still get a reward out of it anyways, even if you lose a playoff game to the hottest team out there. So I don't really have strong feelings.
Here's the problem. If you compare it to like the NFL, right? If you are the home team in the NFL, you have home field advantage. You get to play on your turf, where in fantasy, you don't get that at all. Right. It's 0-0.
There's no travel.
There's no travel. One of the reasons why I like picking your opponents outside of, I mean, the number one seed literally gets to pick which team they want to go against. It makes a little bit more rivalries when it comes to this, right? Because if you're the number 2 ranked team in your league and the number 1 seed picks you, okay, now you're probably a little ticked off, right? Like there's a little bit of an edge. So over time, that kind of creates this extra little rivalry, which I always think is fun.
Boy, you picked me and I just knocked you off and you were the 1 seed, you know?
Exactly. Right.
Right.
It makes it a little bit more competitive.
I don't dislike it. I think that's a great idea the more I think it through. I mean, that is a nice reward for being number 1. It puts it in your hands. You know, you could just be like, I'm not going to put that much time into it. Just give me the lower seed. Or I'm going to look at every one of the teams in the playoffs. Who would I start? What are their matchups? You could really dig into it heavy. Like, they look like a great team, but they're playing great defenses, or there's a lot of weather, you know, or man, they don't really have a good quarterback for this week. I wouldn't want to play them 2 weeks from now, but this week they look pretty soft. I like it more and more the more we talk through it. I think that's a nice reward for being number 2. Do you guys keep it going? Like, if you're the 2nd seed, do you get the 2nd draft pick?
No. Yes. Yeah, of course. So
okay.
Second seed. Yep. You get to pick all the way down through, and that's how the playoffs are decided. Now,
Cool.
that's only for round 1. Once the bracket is set up, then it goes out the rest of the way. But yeah, personally, I like that better than a number 1 seed. I mean, the number 1 seed getting a bye. Partially because I play in a lot of leagues where it's like 8 teams make the playoffs, and it just makes it easier to do the 3 rounds, right? 8, 4, 2. But I'm open to anything. I want to give dynasty managers more rewards for being the number 1 seed, because it's really hard to do that, right?
Really
like
hard.
It's really hard to make it through the course of the season, dealing with injuries and bye weeks and all that kind of stuff. So I want to know from the listeners, like, what rules or what things have you implemented in your leagues? Because it's something that I know I've struggled with, finding the right balance between not overpowering the number 1 seed, but also properly rewarding them.
So, kind of throw you a curveball in this segment. I've kind of thought for a long time that granting a team or 2 teams a bye is too much of a reward. I mean, in the real world, players travel, they need to rest. I mean, their knees hurt, or they deserve it. In fantasy, I don't need the rest of my players. I mean, the fact that I get to advance is such an advantage, in my opinion, that I prefer something like this, where you get to pick your opponent, not you get to sit home and do nothing and still advance to the next round.
Yeah, because I mean, there's actually some disadvantages in the NFL from being the number 1 seed and having 2 weeks off, right? Because I mean, you get out of rhythm, you get out of sync. That's not the case in fantasy. I mean, your players obviously don't know they're on a bye. So I do struggle with figuring out the right balance there. But I have another just off the. This is completely separate. How do you feel about dynasty leagues that are best ball just during the regular season? Best ball versus set your lineup. Do you play in any best ball dynasty leagues?
I'm very new to best ball. I urge everyone to check it out. I'm not in any dynasty best ball leagues. So my best ball experience, I know I'm very late to the parade, especially for someone that's a quote fantasy analyst to some degree. Last summer on Underdog, I started doing best ball for the first time. I have not done any this year, and I don't know why. I just haven't got around to it, but I really enjoyed doing the drafts. I think you get a great feel for fantasy as a whole. And frankly, one of the reasons I haven't is I didn't do very well last year. I probably did 25 drafts and I end up losing money. I mean, by a pretty significant amount. Not that I played for big stakes and I had some promo codes that got better deals or whatever, but I ended up not doing well. And I didn't know some of the tricks of stacks and things like that too. I just picked the best players. So that's really only my experience with best ball stuff.
Kate and I play in a dynasty best ball league. We actually manage a team together. And it's nice because I do feel like the best team ends up more often than not, at least advancing to the championship game, right? Because if you have all these awesome players, but sometimes you're just making the wrong decisions on who to start and sit, it can be frustrating. At the same time, I don't love it because it doesn't create the same kind of urgency and excitement of, hey, I'm picking this guy this week to start instead of this one, right? And to me, it lowers the activity throughout the course of the season. Right now, all of a sudden, your lack of depth doesn't really matter too much. Your superstars can have up and down weeks, and it doesn't really hurt you one way or the other. I know it's becoming more popular, but I have a hard time, Matt, seeing how in dynasty best ball drafts are going to take over usual start sit ones.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Best ball to me takes some skill out of it. You know what I mean? Right. I really think that there's something to be said for setting your lineup, making tough choices and living with it as opposed to, it's all okay.
I like best ball drafts in the sense of I just get to draft all summer long. Like that part's really fun, but I'm with you. Like once the league, the year starts, I'm not really looking at those teams.
I never looked at them once. I just, at the end of the year, I'm like, I wonder how much I won. Oh, I did bad. Oh, well.
Right. So, when that's fine. I think there are a lot of people where best ball leagues maybe are more suited to them that just like to draft and then to look at the end of the year. But I think for people that are really into fantasy and that are listening to like a Dynasty Football podcast here in the Locked On Podcast Network, I think you're going to like your weekly start sit lineups a little better.
Yeah. All right, plus, I want to trade that guy. Like,
of course.
He's about ready to fall apart. I want to dump him, and you can't.
Let's talk about tanking because tanking is something that I know a lot of my leagues have struggled with. Let's talk about some rule changes that can maybe help. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers. On tomorrow's show, Kate will be back, and we're going to be discussing some things that dynasty leagues could be doing better right now, at least when you compare them to redraft leagues. So make sure you tune in for that. But Matt, I want your thoughts on tanking because I've played, very recently in some leagues where tanking was a major issue, where we were getting into like by October, and there was 4 teams. This was last year, 4 teams that weren't setting a lineup because they wanted to try to get the number 1 pick. How do your leagues combat tanking?
I think that's unexcusable. I think that's dismissal from the leagues type stuff. I mean, kind of like we talked about in the first segment, that not answering trades, not setting lineups is you can't be in the league anymore. I need you to participate. I need you to go to the site and fill out your best lineup, give or take. I mean, it gets a little hairy when you sit a running back that's projected for 17 points for one that's getting for 7 points. I mean, we could debate that, but at least you better set a lineup to me. I don't know how much we talked about. One thing I like about one of the leagues we're in, though, is the bottom 6 teams all fight for a playoff spot. There's a reward for the bottom 6 teams.
Yes.
And the reward in our league is we create a new draft spot between the first and second round. You get 1.13. You get the 13th pick. So, and what they do is you would think, well, the worst team's never going to win that. Well, our commissioner, who's one of the really good commissioners I just mentioned, gives you like a couple bonus points. You get, I forget how it works. If you're the 7 seed, you get no extra points. If you're the 8 seed, you get 2 points. If you're the 9 seed, you get 4 points, whatever. So if you're the 12 seed plus the points you get, much like a point spread, you have as good a chance to win the 13th pick as anybody. So you're in it wholeheartedly. You know, there's a lot to play for. You could end up with 1-1 and 113.
Yeah, and I will say, again, I play in a lot of Dynasty leagues, so I get to see how a lot of these work. We had this set up in the same situation where same exact thing, and it was pick 101 that was up for grabs. But thinking, hey, people are going to set their lineups and really try to go for the spot. They did, right? Of course, everybody did. The problem is what you would end up happening is a team that narrowly missed the playoffs, so maybe they had a couple of injuries in week 12, week 13, ended up getting, I believe this was the year that Ezekiel Elliott, so 2016, it was a 2015 year. They get to pick, and all of a sudden now they're adding Ezekiel Elliott to a already very good team.
I don't like that.
And that's, I agree. I didn't like that either. They ended up being too good, and the bottom teams ended up not being able to ever kind of get out of the basement. One of the things that we did was the final 4 teams, like the 4 worst teams in the league, rather than just going by record, we went by potential points that could be scored all season long. So, and this takes some work, but the commissioner went back and looked at what would be the most amount of points that you could have scored weekly, added them up, and then ranked them 1 through 4. So whoever had the lowest potential points got the number 1 overall pick.
So if you're the best owner ever and you always made the right decision Sunday morning, what would my lineup have been?
And the reason why is because now it doesn't disincentivize you from benching all of your good guys, right? I mean, or cutting all of your good players. And it's actually the absolute worst team in your league getting the number 101 pick. And again, it's not perfect. I understand there's probably nothing perfect to fix tanking, but at least your actual worst team is getting it, rather than some team that 3 weeks into the season, they decide, I don't want to compete this year. I'm just benching Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson all year long.
Yeah, that's a crime to me. Not putting in the lineup, not putting your best lineup in good faith. That's a crime to me. Tad, I assume you agree with me, but I don't mean to speak for you. I don't define tanking as I'm 1-7, my team's bad, I'm going to trade all my good guys for picks.
That's totally
perfectly
different.
fine.
That's rebuilding to me.
That's rebuilding. Yeah. And I can't field a good lineup. I got nothing,
Right.
and that's different to me.
To me, tanking is I'm benching Patrick Mahomes for the final 10 games of the season because I don't want to score points and potentially win games and move my draft pick up. Like the reason why, you're probably wondering, well, why not? Why couldn't a manager do that? That's their team. Because it ends up throwing the rest of the league out of whack, because you might be the team playing 4 straight teams that are setting zeros every week, and your record is artificially boosted while some other team might not get that opportunity. It's just not fair to the rest of the league.
Right. And that Mahomes example doesn't deserve the first overall pick.
No.
I mean, you weren't the worst team. I mean, you don't need the help more than the 11 other teams. I believe that wholeheartedly. Let me throw one thing at you. When Ryan and I used to host the show, we had a guest on, and I forget who it was, unfortunately. But I really love this idea. I haven't done a startup since, but I'm thinking about doing it. That he said one of the approaches he takes to a startup is he doesn't draft any running backs. So he knows he's loaded at receiver, loaded at tight end, loaded at quarterback, but he knows he's going to lose a lot of games in year 1 because his running backs are junk. It's like whatever you could get with the last couple picks. I don't think that's illegal or tanking. I just think that's an interesting strategy.
I agree. I know Adam Harstead at Football Guys wrote.
I think it was Adam did this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he called the N+1 theory, where basically you're not tanking, but you're throwing away one position with the idea that it's going to help you get a higher draft pick the following year.
And running back's the obvious one,
right?
And you take Bijan or Elliott or whatever the next year,
Absolutely. Now you have to luck out a little bit that the right running back is going to come up the following year, but I think that is a rebuilding strategy and not tanking. And to me, that is totally different.
Yeah. And as opposed to investing in running backs that only last 2 or 3 years anyway, I want that to be the last piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And if the right one doesn't come up, I could still trade Garrett Wilson for Bijan Robinson, or I still have other assets, right?
Or for whatever reason, the rest of your team is so dominant and you're winning games despite having a bad running back. Maybe you can make a trade at the deadline and be like, "Hey, I wasn't anticipating this happening.
I'm a running back away."
Right, I'm a running back away. So again, I think that is it's actually a very interesting strategy. It's small.
I want to
kind of want to pull off.
I want to do it really bad. I almost don't want to tell people about it.
I know.
Because
shout out to Adam Harstead, who always does fantastic work. We want to know more about your favorite Dynasty League rule changes, because I know there's a million different variations of Dynasty Leagues out there. So please send them into us. We'll discuss them on the show. We'd like to thank Matt for filling in today for Kate, who will be back tomorrow. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.